Welcome back to Dream Drop Distance, the thing that was supposed to be in part 3 until I realized I bit off way more than I could chew with Birth by Sleep and decided that 285 days was a long enough wait. But here we are with part 4. So far we've changed many things about the overall series, as well as reworked Kingdom Hearts 1, Chain of Memories, 358 Days, KH2, and Birth by Sleep. I'm extremely grateful for all the positive feedback I've received on this rewrite thus far, and I'm excited for what the future holds in this project. But like always, if you have any ideas for things I've missed or changes you think would work better, please leave them in the comments below. This will be your spoiler warning for the entire Kingdom Hearts series, as everything from the original series is fair game. This time around, I made even more data greetings, so I want to thank my friend Ivan, who came through again to hook me up with some custom maps. I highly recommend his channel if you're into KH3 modding. His mods are next level. I'd also like to give a big thanks to ADOL from the Open KH Discord, who gave me early access to his new expanded data greeting mod. Keep an eye out on Nexus Mods for when that one drops. And like always, here's a quick recap of the last video. But if you just binged all previous parts, first of all, fuck yeah. Second of all, skip to this timestamp to move on. The Land of Departure was massively expanded upon. It's now a military society that maintains the supremacy of light across the world through the oppression of the darkness, led by Masters Ericus and Xehanort, with the addition of Bragi, Hermode, Urd, and Vor from Union Cross Dark Road. The land is populated with soldiers of light. Meanwhile, Terra, Ventus, and Aqua are a special task force and are now all Keyblade Masters. Vanitas is no longer related to Ven and is an agent from the realm of darkness who leads the Heartless. Xehanort is trying to pit Vanitas against a light opponent in order to summon the Kingdom Keys and forge the Key of Hearts. Yen Sid and King Mickey are researching why the worlds are separated and drifting apart. Terra accidentally learns to use the darkness after coming in contact with a Heartless, something soldiers of light shouldn't be able to do, which causes concern among Aqua and Ven, thinking it might turn him evil. Xehanort begins to convince Terra that the darkness is not completely evil. The entire opening sequence on the Land of Departure is expanded, adding additional world and character building. The Wayfinders purposefully split up to try and locate and capture Vanitas. Some flashbacks happen at some point. Xehanort further convinces Terra of his worldview. Ventus finds Vanitas, but Vanitas purposefully ignores him because he set his sights on Aqua as his opponent. Terra gradually learns to use the darkness more and more. Aqua, who is still told to keep tabs on Terra's darkness, finds herself conflicted over being honest or protecting Terra. As Terra finds out Aqua's secret task, Ven and Aqua slowly start to see that the darkness might not be changing Terra. Lee and Isa are brought in by Xehanort to be his disciples out of their own desperation for purpose and direction. The Mirage Arena is expanded with a whole story and has more interesting tournaments and special bosses. Vanitas and the Heartless launch an all-out assault on the Castle of Dreams, drawing in the Wayfinders and revealing his plan to take back what the light has been stealing from them. During his fight with Ven, Vanitas summons the Kingdom Key D and unlocks the keyhole to the Castle of Dreams, marking a huge victory for the darkness as the world is completely consumed despite the Wayfinders' best efforts. Ventus then summons the Kingdom Key. Ericus tries to take it from him and kill Ventus, but is stopped by Terra, who slays down Ericus regrettably. Vanitas unlocks the keyhole in the Land of Departure as well, and it plunges to darkness. At the Keyblade Graveyard, Aqua's soul fight is against Breig, Isa, and Lee. Ven and Vanitas clash their Kingdom Keys, and Xehanort admits he wanted Terra to stand by his side, but settles for possessing Terra like originally. Ven and Vanitas forge the Key of Hearts, but Vanitas is backstabbed by Terranort as he extracts Vanitas' heart, and then extracts Ven's heart as well. The Lingering Will surprise attacks Terranort as Aqua destroys the Key of Hearts. The Keyblade Graveyard in the Lingering Will is engulfed in an explosion. Aqua takes Ven's body to the consumed Land of Departure and seals away the castle to oblivion like originally. Terranort shows up outside Castle Oblivion to fight Aqua out of frustration, banishing her to the realm of darkness. We got it! If you want to understand the reasons behind all of those changes, you're gonna have to watch the previous video. I get it, it's a long video. Your mother. Dream Drop Distance is going to be an interesting one. It's in a bit of an awkward place in the series because it felt like it was less about continuing where we left off, but rather needlessly stretching the story to compensate for the lack of KH3, and of course falling flat and pissing off a lot of the fanbase in the process. There's a lot that needs to change here. Characters need to be integrated better, the scenario needs to be improved, plot points need to be adjusted, and of course everything I've been building up to in my rewrite needs to come to focus. The story will be pretty different, but hopefully better? Remembering where we left off with KH2, there's a lot to be resolved. Riku and Naminé have done some shitty things and want to correct their mistakes. Kairi just met her grandfather only to have him ripped away from her. Our characters are questioning everything they know, and they realize that the fight has only just begun. Since a lot of things were explained in BBS at this point, Dream Drop Distance will play the same role it does originally, bridging the gap and setting up KH3. Plenty of the same scenarios will remain, but as it usually goes, the specifics will be altered. We're going to be dealing heavily with the concept of dreaming, and the changes I made in Part 1 to dreaming in what is broadly considered the soul world will finally come to the forefront. But why exactly that is, I think should be different. I don't think the concept of sleeping worlds makes a lot of sense. I mean, why are entire worlds and people physically stuck in a dream? It's explained that sleeping worlds are worlds lost in darkness that never made their way back, but with the changes to the realms of light and dark, I don't think this works anymore. If a world is consumed by darkness, it just chills in or around the dark realm, similar to what we'll see in 0.2. So I'm changing it up. The worlds we'll visit in this game are real worlds, but we won't be visiting them in the physical sense, but rather they're representations of these real worlds in dreams, created solely from memories within Sora. And yes, there are obviously a bunch of new worlds in this game that Sora's never visited, therefore there's no way he could have any memories of them. My idea is that the new Disney worlds aren't made from Sora's memories, but from Ventus's. Ventus is a Keyblade master who spent many years traveling to different worlds fighting the darkness, a lot of which took place off-screen before Birth by Sleep. So since Ven sleeps within Sora, those memories sleep within him as well. Thus, when Sora dives into the heart and starts dreaming, he unexpectedly encounters some of the worlds from Ven's past. Now, none of the worlds will play out exactly as Ventus or Sora remembers them because they're not just journeying through memories, they're journeying through dreams, which are more chaotic deviations of things based off elements from memories. How does this explain The Grid, a world that's a sequel to Space Paranoid, something Sora recently visited? I think of it like Sora's memories just, it's kind of like, okay, I don't know. It's a dream anyways, try not to think too hard about it. It's a cool world, so I'm keeping it. And I'm willing to let the logic break a couple times for the sake of keeping a more fun experience. But this now begs the question, what about Riku? That has to do with a broader change I'm going to make. The focus of Dream Drop Distance is obviously the Mark of Mastery exam. However, since they're no longer awakening sleeping keyholes, my idea for the purpose of their Mark of Mastery exam and the focus of this entire game is to restore Roxas's, Xion's, and Ventus's hearts from within Sora. Long term, the reason I want to tackle the restoration of these characters now is so that I can decompress KH3 a little bit. However, they're not exactly going to be fully restored, ready to kick it for the beginning of KH3. It'll all make sense later. This change starts with the addition of Kairi as a main playable character. I'll say it here and now, there will be no more Kairi sitting on the sidelines not being taken seriously. Yes, in the original up to this point, she wasn't ready to be a full-fledged Keyblade wielder. However, in my changes to Kairi in both Part 1 and Part 2, she trained just as much as Sora and Riku on Destiny Islands, she could stand on her own with the Kingdom Key, she summoned her own Keyblade much earlier, and was able to mostly handle herself throughout the majority of KH2, being able to briefly fend off Axel and even assisted in the fight against Xemnas. I'm perfectly comfortable saying with everything I've changed, she can hold her own. Therefore, Kairi will fight alongside Sora and Riku and be a playable character in Dream Drop Distance. You can argue that her missing out on most of KH1 and all of Castle Oblivion means she still has to prove herself, but otherwise she'll be more than capable as a playable character. Now, the whole dreaming thing is going to have some weird parameters. You'll have to bear with me. Sora, Riku, and Kairi are going to use a technique I'm calling diving in order to enter Sora's soul world and dream Sora's dreams. If you remember from Part 1, the soul world is a dream world that can explore the contents of one's heart, including memories and emotions. And by entering the soul, they'll be able to locate exactly where the other hearts are. Naminé should be the one who discovered the diving spell in Zexion's Book of Retribution, and it allows them to fall asleep and transfer their consciousness into Sora's soul world. Their mission is to locate the sleeping hearts and restore them using the power of waking. Now, a big retcon is I don't think the power of waking should be this incredibly difficult power to achieve, and especially not something we should waste the entirety of KH3 worrying about. Mostly because it's really not that interesting. It should instead be a simple reverse spell Naminé created herself and shared with Yen-Sid, and is used to not only manually restore and separate sleeping hearts within someone, but to also wake themselves up if they need to. Naminé creating such a spell from scratch starts to emphasize how she's vastly improving her knowledge of witchcraft and of hearts. While conducting the diving spell, Yen-Sid will only be able to get a vague sense of their progress, such as how far they've dived and whether or not they're in danger, which I'll admit is a plot device that allows our characters to experience some crazy things with little interruption. The reason diving is a difficult mission to the extent that it constitutes a Mark of Mastery exam is because if they die while diving, they die in real life. And this brings us to Dream Eaters, both spirits and nightmares. Spirits will be your main allies in gameplay, but spirits can also refer to normal characters encountered in the worlds created from memories. The opposite is true for nightmares. There's still malicious Dream Eaters who will serve as the main general enemies of this game, but nightmares can also be normal enemies, meaning theoretically any enemy that exists in the memories of Sora, Roxas, Xion, or Ventus is fair game. That's only one of the reasons why diving is an incredibly dangerous task. The other reason is that someone else could use the dive technique and connect to Sora's dream network, aka someone like Xehanort, and pose a threat. One additional element to this is that anyone else diving into Sora's heart will also have some of their memories leak out into the dream world, meaning elements of Riku's and Kairi's dreams will appear in some ways, as well as Xehanort's. So it's like one big smorgasbord of dreams and otherworldly occurrences that are going to drive this game. I think the best way to naturally integrate Kairi into the story is by reworking exactly how the full story will be experienced. I'll be honest, I don't like the drop feature. Losing control over who you play as and having your experience constantly interrupted was super annoying and ruined the flow of gameplay in my opinion. So I'm getting rid of it. But to also avoid having to needlessly stretch an entire new experience for Kairi in every world, I'm not going to go with the birth by sleep model either by giving Kairi her own separate story. Instead, I'm going to suggest something new for the series, and that's sectioning a single playthrough. Perhaps Sora goes through one world, and once you complete it, you choose to play as either Riku or Kairi in another world, and so forth. This would make certain characters' stories exclusive to certain worlds, such as only Riku visiting Klosh or Sora visiting the grid. And while obviously there'd be multiple visits to worlds like Traverse Town, it would be structured in a way that doesn't have you doing the same world 3 times in a row. Here's what I mapped out in terms of a world order I think makes the most sense. The very first world should actually be Sora's dive to the heart. Like I've mentioned, the dive to the heart is the central hub or entrance to the heart, so it should be the very first place our characters visit while diving. Once you finish that, you'll begin in what I'll call the first section of the game, where you can choose to either play as Sora in Traverse Town, Riku in La Cité de Cloche, or Kairi in Country of the Musketeers. After beating one, you have to complete the other 2 worlds before moving on to the next section. This is so that the story beats can align more logically and you get a better sense of time frame. The second section of the game will be Sora in the Grid, Riku in Traverse Town, and Kairi in Prankster's Paradise. The third section will be Sora in Country of the Musketeers, Riku in Symphony of Sorcery, and Kairi in Traverse Town. As you can tell, Traverse Town kind of acts like the bookmark of each section because the story with The World Ends With You is kind of a highlight. Then we'll be in the final section of the game, which will have Sora, Riku, and Kairi simultaneously visit something new I'm calling Memories Contortion, which is a name that's already existed in KH2, I know, but this is something completely different, and I'm hijacking the name because it works. It's an idea that I think is really cool that I'll explain later. Then for the last world, Sora, Riku, and Kairi will all visit the world that never was, similar to how it is originally. I think this is a pretty balanced world order that doesn't needlessly drag anything out too far. I wasn't too specific on the reasons what world is exclusive to who, it just sort of worked out this way to fit everything as neatly as I could. It's cool to imagine just how much fun Kairi would have in Prankster's Paradise, or how out of place Riku would be in the music world Symphony of Sorcery. Even though certain worlds are exclusive to certain characters, at any time you can revisit each world as any character in order to complete things you've missed, and little Easter eggs would be sprinkled about when visiting as different characters. Sora, Riku, and Kairi will all have similar playstyles, but like it is originally, there should be stylistic differences and variations, as well as unique links. Riku should still be able to use dark abilities and access his dark mode, Sora should get unique links that cause something similar to drive forms, and Kairi could also get unique links that are light and floral themed, perhaps even some kind of princess form. I want to quickly make a few appearance changes from the get-go. Y'all probably saw this coming, but our characters should keep their older appearances from KH2 while diving. While the dream outfit designs were perfectly fine, the fact that Sora and Riku were their younger selves was a stylistic choice the developers went with that I just don't agree with. The story takes place post KH2, so why would they de-age? I think they should all remain their present, older selves. Sora and Riku can keep the same dream outfits because they actually translate pretty well over to their older selves, while Kairi should get a new outfit to match them. This design by Crystal Lily Potter has been really popular in the fan community and looks awesome, so we'll go with this one. And of course, these are solely dream outfits and they'll be in their normal KH2 attire whenever we see them in the real world. And also, Riku should keep his longer hair from KH2. I think it fits his character better and Riku just looks way cooler with it.
Riku is a sexy guy. He's just a sexy guy.
Lastly, I want to talk about Xehanort in this game. Xehanort secretly also dived into Sora's heart as soon as the exam commenced, with the main goal of using the chaotic nature of dreams to manipulate and control Sora so he can get to the Kingdom Key. Now, I want to clarify that the Xehanort we'll be seeing later in this game is going to be Terra Xehanort, not Old Man Xehanort. First reason is because that's the Xehanort that had his heart split. Second reason is because, like I touched upon last video, the idea of Xehanort splitting his heart between 13 darknesses is no longer a thing. I'll clarify what that change entails later, and that brings us to our first big retcon, young Xehanort. Having a younger form of Xehanort brought from the past is innately tied to the time travel headache first introduced in Dream Drop Distance, and I don't like it. Time travel made for some really awkward plot elements that needlessly complicated a lot of the earlier stories, such as Ansem and KH1. It's a very weak plot element because it was introduced so late into the series. That being said, I think young Xehanort can remain. In this instance, he's simply a dream element who spilled out directly from Xehanort. However, what I want to portray with the presence of young Xehanort will be much different. Because this dream element is how Xehanort remembers himself, I want young Xehanort to take us through different phases Xehanort went through in his formative years, as a way of having Sora get to know Xehanort as a person and understand his motivations. In doing so, the real Xehanort hopes to craft a careful narrative, showing Sora why Xehanort became the person he is today, as a means of trying to convince Sora to join his side, something he failed to do with Terra. And for the remainder of young Xehanort's appearances in this game, he'll be in normal attire, as opposed to the black coat because that just makes sense, and I'm kind of sick of seeing the black coat at this point. So let's start at the beginning of the game. Since the theme is still dreams, I think it's perfectly fine for the game to open with a dream sequence on Destiny Islands fighting Ursula. Very Disney, very dreamlike. However, it's just a normal dream that Sora experiences before the story begins to kind of show how Sora's dreams are much more vivid and powerful now that he has 3 other hearts hidden inside of him. Since it's all a dream, the sporadic nature of it makes perfect sense, and them being in their KH1 getup is fine too, as a little throwback. The dream now includes Kairi, and they all set sail on the raft only to get stuck in a storm and encounter Ursula. She gets filleted on a silver platter, they dive underwater, seal a keyhole, and here's one change. Instead of catching a glimpse of Ansem, we should instead catch a glimpse of Anti-Sora. As a recurring theme in this game, I want to show a struggle with the dark form that emerged within Sora, and it will be taken in an interesting direction. So the appearance of Anti-Sora haunts the end of this dream he experiences. There should also be a scene of Sora being snapped awake in his bedroom at Destiny Islands, concerned as to why his dark form spooked him, remarking how the dream as a whole felt incredibly real, then looking outside his window at the island to see that everything is fine. Before our characters head to the mysterious tower, I want to start this game off with a good character scene between Sora, Riku, and Kairi on Destiny Islands, as a way of starting where things left off. After Sora wakes from his dream, he heads to the island where he spots Kairi sitting on the tree. Sora approaches her, telling her good morning. Kairi at this point is still dealing with grief, but she tries her best to match Sora's positivity and goofiness as she teases him about his crazy dream. He asks how she's feeling, to which Kairi explains that she can still feel Gnosis in her heart, having faith he's still out there. Sora is optimistic as well, while Kairi continues that after seeing many worlds firsthand and knowing how many people are in pain, she feels it's her calling to ensure no one is stripped away from their homes ever again. That reason must be why the Keyblade chose her. She also posits that once all is said and done, she wishes to return to Radiant Garden and help finish the restoration effort. Kairi asks about how Sora's feeling, as he explains how when Roxas transferred his emotions to him at the end of KH2, Sora felt the happiness, the laughter, and then the pain and the grief, which is all the more reason why Roxas deserves to be his own person. What's more is that Roxas felt an incredible sense of love that Sora can't begin to explain, as he glances towards Kairi. That's when Riku approaches, greeting the two, and we see the trio staring out at the horizon in a similar callback to the beginning of KH1. Riku states how today's the day they can begin to set things right. Kairi asks if Riku's heard from Naminé at all, to which he imagines she's still cooped up in her lab. Kairi's confused why she hasn't talked to him, teasing that she's like his girlfriend now. Riku brushes it off, saying how it's been hard for both of them because of everything that's happened, remembering all the horrible stuff that they both caused. But that's why this exam is so important, and why Naminé has worked so hard to figure this thing out, referring to her work on the dive spell we'll learn about in a minute. After a pause, Sora nervously asks Riku how he learned to control the darkness, bringing up Sora's concern over Antiform. Riku ponders the question for a moment, remembering that in order to control the darkness, he first had to conquer it. This can include a flashback to unseen events during KH1, when Ansem granted Riku the Soul Eater sword, and how he had to wrestle with the sword and prove his worthiness until it finally responded to him. Riku imagines the circumstances could be different for Sora, seeing as he unlocked it through different means. Sora ponders to himself the words, "Conquer the darkness," as Kairi and Riku look to him, both concerned. The scene ends there. After the events of KH2, King Mickey and Yen Sid should have been working tirelessly to put their brains together and figure out a plan moving forward, which mostly consists of connecting the dots between Ansem, Xemnas, and Master Xehanort. Knowing that Xehanort will likely return, their immediate plan of action is to assemble a team of strong Keyblade wielders. That means giving Sora, Riku, and Kairi their Mark of Mastery exams to prep them for the dangers to come, as well as trying to save all the missing Keyblade wielders, including Masters Terra, Ventus, Aqua, as well as Roxas and Xion. Additionally, because of one big change I made in Birth by Sleep, Yen Sid also alludes to Masters Bragi, Hermod, Urd, and Vor. After the consumption of the Land of Departure, the Elders were not seen or heard from again, but Yen Sid holds out hope that they are out there somewhere. After Mickey's encounter with Roxas in Days, Mickey theorizes that Ven is inside Sora's heart due to Roxas's identical appearance, noting his time reading Gnosis's research in KH2 and learning the nature of fragmentation. This realization inspired the idea to dive into Sora's heart to try and save all the sleeping hearts. Meanwhile, Terra's whereabouts are unknown to them because Mickey never got close enough to witness Terranort in the Keyblade graveyard, and I'm making it so that Aqua's whereabouts are also unknown, which retcons part of 0.2, I know, I'll talk about it later. So Yen Sid and Mickey call Sora, Riku, and Kairi to the tower, along with Donald and Goofy. Yen Sid briefs the plan moving forward and sets up the Paupu trio's Mark of Mastery exam. He catches them up to speed on the story of the Wayfinder trio and how they will eventually need to search for Terra and Aqua, but as of now, they don't know where they are or if either of them are even alive. Xehanort is after the Kingdom Keys, which both combined can control the entity known as Kingdom Hearts. Yen Sid explains that when he was a Keyblade master out of the Land of Departure, they were taught Kingdom Hearts was an entity of legends that is of pure light and brought order to the universe until it was lost to darkness. But given the knowledge he's learned since Birth by Sleep, he suspects that the truth remains untold. Only Xehanort bears that knowledge, making him even more dangerous. He continues that Sora, Riku, and Kairi still have much to prove in terms of their prowess as Keyblade wielders, especially Kairi since she was dormant throughout most of KH1, but given the circumstances, they need all the Keyblade wielders they can get, so it's important that they are all put to the test. Yen Sid prefaces that regardless of the results of their exam, a lot of responsibility will be placed on these three, apologizing that the times are desperate and they need new leaders to swear to protect the worlds from what's to come. He continues that being in the Soul World will allow them to learn to use their Keyblades in creative and eccentric ways due to the lucid nature of dreams, foreshadowing things like flow motion and the many unique commands they'll learn. Regarding the exam, Yen Sid warns that they will likely face many unconventional enemies, including both Dream Eaters and powerful enemies from Sora's memories, so the challenge could be the most difficult yet. Yen Sid recommends that they stick together as much as necessary and search as thoroughly as possible. He also states that in the event that they are on the brink of defeat, they should wake themselves up immediately. They won't sustain any of their injuries in real life, but if they die while diving, they die in real life. However, they should only wake up if absolutely necessary, otherwise they will lose all of their progress. And in order to ensure the exam conducts without any outside interruptions, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy will stand guard on their sleeping bodies. As Yensid casts the diving spell and Sora, Riku, and Kairi fall to slumber, the trio all arrive in Sora's dive to the heart, and they begin to traverse around the stations. It'll essentially be an intro tutorial on how the basic combat and movement mechanics work, and you'll swap back and forth between the three characters for different things, kind of like what I did for Birth by Sleep. Then I think it would be cool if it ends in a battle against the Twilight Thorn, something the developers originally planned for this game but was scrapped for some reason. The Twilight Thorn battle will be in 3 different stages, and you'll play as a different character for each one with the other characters in your party. Then, when it's defeated, the chaos of its defeat causes the dive to the heart to deteriorate around them and our characters get separated, officially diving deeper than surface level and kickstarting the rest of the game. You can then choose which character in which world to play first, and the world progression starts from there. Like with previous entries, pretty much all the Disney subplots can remain the same. But now that some of the Disney worlds aren't split into 2 separate stories for Sora and Riku, but rather one complete story for whoever is visiting, this being Cloche, Grid, Prankster, and Symphony, whichever character is there simply experiences the whole Disney story. I'm kind of waving the magic wand on this one and leaving it up to the imagination because I can't be fucked to do it myself. As Sora meets the World Ends With You gang and travels around Traverse Town, he has his first encounter with young Xehanort. And this is the version of Xehanort before he got stuck in the Realm of Darkness and had his life changed. So he's a normal Keyblade master from the Land of Departure, oblivious and indoctrinated like the rest. As Sora's fighting Dream Eaters, young Xehanort swoops in out of nowhere and wipes the floor with them. Young Xehanort's powers will still mostly be based around time magic because it adds unique variety and doesn't immediately tip off to the player that it's Xehanort. Sora doesn't recognize him and is surprised by how well he wields a Keyblade. Xehanort gives him a friendly spiel about how to better use the Keyblade and how Xehanort's been deployed to fend off the darkness. Sora tells him he's looking for his friends who are also Keyblade wielders, to which Xehanort tells Sora that a Keyblade wielder should never lose track of their fellow teammates as they're his most valuable asset. Sora tries to ask who he is, but Xehanort opts out by saying he's a Keyblade master who knows what he's talking about. Xehanort parts by saying he'll keep a lookout for his friends and flies away on his Keyblade glider. Sora's pretty confused by the situation, having now seen an unknown Keyblade wielder on top of all the other characters he's met from The World Ends With You that he doesn't have memories of. And that's that. I want to have Breig and Isa play a bigger role than they did originally. Because I established in part 2 that Xigbar and Saïx are secretly Xehanort's personal disciples, they also dive into Sora's heart at Xehanort's behest with the main goal of keeping Riku and Kairi out of the way. And in order to do so, Xigbar and Saïx show up to berate Riku and Kairi, with Riku and Kairi assuming they're just created from Sora's memories and pry through. I still want Ansem and Xemnas to be in this game for funsies, so Xigbar and Saïx manipulate a nightmare version of Ansem and Xemnas to also show up alongside them and harass Riku and Kairi similarly. But for now, Xigbar and Ansem's nightmare show up in Riku's worlds, while Saïx and Xemnas' nightmare show up in Kairi's. They spill a lot of exposition regarding balance and the Kingdom Keys, they try and mess with their heads, they manipulate the Nightmare Dream Eaters to try and slow them down. You know the works. There should be a scene where Xigbar grills Riku about how he had a lot of potential, being that he awakened the darkness and he was almost chosen to wield the Kingdom Key, but Riku blew it and he prioritized his selfish goals. This reintroduces a lot of the guilt Riku has pent up inside him, which will continue to surface throughout this game. Meanwhile, Saïx towards Kairi is playing off this idea that Kairi will never be at the same level as Sora and Riku, and also is like, haha, your grandpa died, and he scoffs at the idea that Kairi can still feel Gnosis, believing such a connection to be impossible. Now, outside of Sora's dreams, I want to expand the scenario of how Lee and the rest of the previous organization members awaken fully restored at Radiant Garden. And this scenario will now include Naminé. It starts with Lee waking up in a cell within the hallway of the Chamber of Repose, which, if you remember from part 2, is where I said the organization members were locked in when their hearts were being experimented on. Well, it turns out that that's also where their whole hearts and original bodies remained. So as their fragments were defeated, memories from those fragmented hearts eventually made their way back through the power of magic and asspull. Lee is dazed and confused, slowly regaining all of his lost memories and becoming whole again. Meanwhile, you suddenly hear a loud banging on Lee's cell door. The door starts to break open, and on the other side is Alias, smashing it down with his tomahawk. Alongside Alias out in the hallway is Dylan, Ienzo, Evan, and I'm also adding Demix, who was never actually given a non-nobody name, but I think Emid sounds the best. They all gather up in the hallway as Lee still casually struggles to process what's going on. Evan is freaking out, Alias and Dylan are double-checking cells, Emid is plucking away at his damn sitar. Meanwhile, Ienzo is carefully studying the hallway, noting how all the other doors had been either opened normally or torn apart, excluding the ones they tore apart themselves. Ienzo deduces that 2 of the doors that were torn apart belonged to Marluxia and Larxene, simply based on the shape of the tears in the metal. However, those appear to have been open for a while. That leaves 3 doors remaining, belonging to Breig, Isa, and Luxord. 2 doors appear to have been opened normally from the outside, which is Breig and Isa, but they don't know that for sure yet. While the last door they broke down themselves, but there was no one inside, this secretly being Luxord. More on him in the future. The door at the end of the hall is completely opened, with nothing but the empty throne in the center. Evan and Ienzo know this as the room that held Xehanort's body. Cut to Naminé, who's in Gnosis' study, the place where she's been spending most of her days operating out of since the end of KH2, reading as much as possible to try and absorb every last bit of information. And she's now wearing one of Gnosis' lab coats because it's fitting. She suddenly hears alarms going off from down in the computer room, so she quickly runs over to see what's happening. The computer is sounding off loud sirens describing a security breach. She has no idea what it's even talking about, but then a video feed pops up showing the organization members stuck down in the chamber. She's startled by the sight of all these past members and doesn't know where they even are. Cut to a montage of her scrubbing through the computer to finally discover that they're down underneath the manufactory. She works some Deus Ex Machina BS to get the hatch to appear, and she heads down to open the chamber. The hatch opens, and the group sees Naminé standing before them. Before they step any further, Naminé casts a binding spell on everyone except Lee, who she threateningly demands to explain what's going on. Lee quickly tells Naminé that their fragmented hearts return to their normal bodies and that they're not bad guys anymore. Before she can respond, Ienzo is able to snap his fingers to dispel the binds, releasing everyone to Naminé's dismay. Ienzo dusts off his shoulders and compliments Naminé on her prowess with witchcraft. The scene ends there for now. Back in the dreams, a recurring detail I think should be present throughout everyone's journey would be catching glimpses of Roxas, Xion, and Ventus, only to disappear shortly after, acting to push our characters to keep venturing forward and always keeping the main plot connected. And now, I want to talk about Antiform. Sora encounters Anti-Sora among the dream worlds wreaking havoc, either messing with the various characters or fighting alongside the nightmares, and Sora is continually unable to subdue it as it overpowers him. Every time he sees Anti-Sora, he's reminded of his past encounters with the darkness, such as when the dark side haunted his dream at the start of KH1, or when the Heartless attacked Destiny Islands, and it causes Sora to have an almost kind of anxiety response as he tries to desperately defeat Antiform. By the end of each encounter, it slips away, and Sora's left frustrated that he can't conquer the darkness like Riku said. When Riku is visiting Traverse Town, at one point he finds himself reliving an experience he had with Maleficent and Ansem back in KH1, of him being forced to use the power of darkness, something that was physically painful for Riku at the time, and this memory sort of haunts him for a brief moment, causing him to freak out before the experience instantly goes away. As he regains himself, he realizes how desperate he is to make amends by undoing his past wrongs, while not knowing if he'll truly ever be able to. Meanwhile, in a similar fashion, while Kairi visits Prankster's Paradise, as she's reminded of the fun times she used to have with her grandparents around town, she's caught by the memory of Radiant Garden collapsing to darkness when she was a child, a memory she's had suppressed for the longest time. She sees Gnosis and her grandma desperately trying to bring Kairi to safety as Heartless begin attacking the townspeople and the world starts to crumble due to the dark storm in the sky. She relives the last moment she saw her grandparents, putting her in an evacuation pod as they shed tears from the outside, forced to send her off. The painful memory instantly ends as Kairi is erupting in tears, this being the first time she's ever had to relive that moment, experiencing the absolute helplessness that she vowed she would never let herself feel again. When Sora first arrives at the grid, he spots young Xehanort out in the open, but this time Xehanort isn't looking too hot. This phase of Xehanort is when he first gets trapped in the realm of darkness. Sora notices something is clearly wrong with him as he looks incredibly defeated, almost dragging his feet as Xehanort walks forward. Sora asks if everything's okay, which startles Xehanort as he quickly darts his eyes at Sora. Xehanort asks how Sora got there, to which Sora doesn't understand what he means, attempting to remind Xehanort that they met in Traverse Town. Xehanort violently grabs Sora by his shoulder, shouting that they need to find a way out of here or else the darkness will swallow them whole. Sora shakes off Xehanort, having no idea what he's talking about. That's when Xehanort appears to be startled by something off in the distance and instinctually draws his Keyblade, shouting "that way" and running off. As Sora attempts to chase him, that's when he's interrupted by the large recognizer ship and the world commences. Cut to the end of the grid after all is said and done, and right before Sora leaves, he finds young Xehanort once again. This is Xehanort right before he escapes the Dark Realm after having been there for quite some time. Sora carefully approaches him, noticing how he's just calmly sitting and staring off into the distance. Without turning around, Xehanort says Sora's name, apologizing for freaking out on him previously. Sora asks what that was back there, and Xehanort asks Sora to take a seat next to him. Sora asks what his name is, which prompts Xehanort to ponder, telling him he no longer remembers who he is as he's been stuck here for so long. Sora asks what he means by that, to which Xehanort explains that he's been trapped in the realm of darkness for what feels like an eternity. Sora confusingly refutes that they're not in the realm of darkness, they're in a dream. Xehanort ignores those words, instead asking Sora what he thinks of the darkness, asking if Sora sees the Heartless as evil. Sora immediately sees a brief flash of Anti-Sora, startling him at the thought. He then considers the question for a bit, responding that the Heartless tried to consume his world and hurt many of his friends, and that to this day he still doesn't understand why. Xehanort continues that after being trapped, he's been forced to use the darkness and has learned so much about how the Heartless think and act. He sees the Heartless not as this innate evil, but very similar to the light, fighting for their own safety. Almost everything he's been taught about the darkness has been debunked right before his eyes. Xehanort buries his face into his hands, asking himself if that means the light are the bad guys. Sora says that he thinks it doesn't matter if it's dark or light, all that matters is who's using it and for what. That in fact everyone is made up of both darkness and light. Xehanort lifts his head with determination and begins to stand, stating that he will find the answer, that no matter what the cost, he will bring an end to the torment, that it's his responsibility. Sora looks out into the distance for a moment, but when he turns his head back, Xehanort's completely vanished, baffling Sora to his feet, quickly scanning his surroundings to find Xehanort's nowhere in sight. Cut back to the outside world with the org members in Gnosis' study, where they catch Naminé up to speed on what happened to them. Having become their normal selves, everyone shares the guilt of having been manipulated by Xemnas against their will, especially Ienzo and Evan for blindly contributing to the research that helped a man who called himself Ansem, but was actually Xehanort. This is when Ienzo tells the full story of everything that went down in Gnosis' lab during that period, from his perspective. There's some more details we'll discuss a bit later. We know from the end of Birth by Sleep that Gnosis took in Xehanort, who called himself Ansem. Soon after his adoption, Xehanort contributed invaluable knowledge to the research surrounding hearts, something Gnosis, Ienzo, and Evan had only cracked the surface of before his arrival. However, in pursuit of that knowledge, the group was enticed to perform more and more unconventional and unethical experiments, including fragmentation and extracting hearts. It was an absolute breakthrough that they believed could help many people, but Xehanort's persistence on taking the experiments further started to take a toll on their mental health, and they began to push back and distance themselves from the research. The last straw was when Xehanort presented his theory that hearts were made of both light and darkness, and while he couldn't prove it without a doubt, he had conducted experiments without Gnosis' approval. Although some of his evidence at the time was very convincing, Gnosis shut it down, asserting that such ideas were best left forgotten, fearing the political turmoil it could cause across the lands, which are already vulnerable after the fall of the Land of Departure. Xehanort was eventually banished from the research team, but he persisted with his findings, coercing Ienzo and Evan to assist him in secret. By then, Gnosis distanced himself heavily from the research team as it took a huge mental toll on him, opting to spend more time with his family. Meanwhile, Xehanort was eventually able to fully identify the exact percentage of light and dark in each heart, which always came out to 50-50 regardless of who he tested. With the knowledge of this research, Xehanort presumed that he could split apart both the light and dark portions of the heart, creating the first known pure hearts of light and darkness. They tested it out on a simple Heartless and found that the two halves were diametrically opposed to one another, always fighting each other on sight. Xehanort was enthralled by the research unlike anything else and soon began insisting that Ienzo and Evan perform the 50-50 procedure on him. When they outright refused, Xehanort threatened them, summoning his Keyblade, something they had never seen him wield before. So Xehanort forced Evan and Ienzo down into the Chamber of Repose where originally Heartless were being experimented on. They split Xehanort's heart, and out came 2 hearts of pure light and dark, 2 hearts of Xehanort, dubbed Ansem and Xemnas. Ansem's disgust with the realm of light led him to immediately escape the chamber and vanish. Xemnas stayed behind and enslaved Evan and Ienzo to help him experiment further on people, clearly retaining some memories of his time as Xehanort. He wanted to create fragmented hearts he could control and make a cult out of, so he began capturing people he found around Radiant Garden and fragmenting their hearts, creating the organization. One fateful day, Ansem returned with the Kingdom Key D in hand, spouting that light has been in charge for far too long and that the darkness needed to take over. He opened Radiant Garden's keyhole, which caused chaos across the world as it plunged to darkness. Xemnas and the organization were swallowed into the realm of darkness, arriving in a place known as the Dark City. Far above the city is where Xemnas discovered Kingdom Hearts, hidden within a shroud of darkness. That's when Xemnas decided to base his operations out of the realm of darkness and build the castle that never was, acting as their new headquarters. Meanwhile, Radiant Garden had all but crumbled into a hollow bastion, which is where Ansem chose to operate out of and continued to visit world by world, opening keyholes, spreading more and more darkness throughout. Ienzo's story has Naminé pondering for a moment, knowing that because Xemnas was defeated and if Xehanort's body is no longer in that throne room, it's inevitable that he has returned and escaped. Ienzo concludes that it must have been Xehanort who opened the 2 unknown doors down in the chamber. That's when Lee steps up to shamefully explain that Breig, Isa, and him were Master Xehanort's former disciples, leading them to realize it was Breig and Isa who must have been let out. While it doesn't explain how Marluxia and Larxene returned early or why Luxor disappeared altogether, they know that they should immediately warn Sora and friends that, without a doubt, Xehanort is back. Naminé explains that they're taking their Mark of Mastery exam and that they're under the diving spell. Ienzo knows of the dive technique and questions how they figured it out, so Naminé summons the Book of Retribution to show that it's been in her possession since Zexion was defeated, which baffles Ienzo. He explains that he discovered the book in the Dark City, which contained valuable information about how to manipulate the darkness to create spells they never could have achieved with the light. Naminé asks Lee if he was also a disciple of Xehanort, why didn't he also get broken out? To which he responds that it's probably because he stopped following Xehanort after he was directed to fight Aqua, and that shortly after their retreat, Isa and Breig disappeared. Lee continues that he also acted against Xemnas, that he could no longer sit by and accept that his best friends, Roxas and Xion, were nothing but pawns in Xemnas' schemes, and that in the end they all were, so he opposed Xemnas and protected Sora. He finishes by saying that he only joined Xehanort all those years ago because he and Isa wanted to belong somewhere knowing they had nothing. When Naminé asks what it is they believed in, Lee hesitates, only now remembering Xehanort's true motive, to restore balance. Later, we catch a scene where Yensid, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy are receiving word from Naminé across a portal of everything she's learned, including Xehanort's return. She concludes that they have no leads on his current whereabouts, but she will continue to search the Chamber of Repose and interview the organization members, updating him if anything surfaces. Yensid thanks Naminé and the portal disperses. Yensid explains it's exactly as they feared, advising Mickey, Donald, and Goofy to be ready for anything. They pray that Sora, Riku, and Kairi make haste. We see another scene back in Gnosis' study where Naminé and the org are searching every last inch for any sort of clue on what Xehanort's next move could be. Lee describes to Naminé and Ienzo the things Xehanort talked about when Lee was one of his disciples. He says that Xehanort believed light and darkness to be a balance maintained by Kingdom Hearts, but that over time the light had overtaken the darkness, which brought ruin to the worlds. He told them that their mission was to topple the power structure of light, thereby allowing the darkness to fight back and bring about the Key of Hearts, God's key, in order to permanently instill balance and order. Lee chalks it up to being a crazy hero's tale thought of by an old coot with a god complex, and that Isa and him were just dumb kids with nowhere to go, looking for a purpose in life. In the end, he wasn't committed enough and Xehanort cast him out, simple as that. However, Lee's tone turns more somber, recalling how Isa was much more dedicated, and by the end of it all, he had lost his best friend. But that somehow Saïx was able to recall their past friendship and remembered Axel's real name. At that moment, Evan, who is scrubbing through the computer, shouts that he found something. Everyone crowds around the computer as he pulls up old archive footage of the Chamber of Repose. They see Xehanort stumbling out of the throne room, clearly distraught, having just been reawakened. The footage shows Terranort making his way down to Breig and Isa's doors, opening them both. As Isa and Breig stumble out, Xehanort commends them for playing their parts perfectly. Isa and Breig express sincere apologies for failing to retrieve the Kingdom Keys, which Xehanort forgives them, saying it was out of their control and that the Kingdom Keys ultimately chose Sora and Mickey, an outcome he was too foolish to conceive when he decided to split his heart all those years ago. He continues that the Kingdom Keys choosing two hearts that cooperate rather than oppose each other changes everything they thought they knew about the selection process, saying it's paramount that they intervene before Sora and Mickey make a wrong move. Isa and Breig try and warn that Sora and Mickey are incredibly powerful, but Xehanort stops them, noting how he is very aware since he retains the memories of both Ansem and Xemnas. However, Xehanort says there are ways to pay a visit to them from afar, that he'll tell them on the way, and they leave into a portal. Evan repeats the phrase, "visit them from afar," as Naminé and Lee scratch their heads at what that means. However, Ienzo is in deep thought. He says that it reminds him of when he was researching for Castle Oblivion. As Zexion scrubbed through the Book of Retribution to consider all his options when dealing with Sora and Riku, the dive spell was a major contender. As it was a technique originally designed for torture, its applications were broad. Particularly, it could be subtly implemented in a way that allowed the caster to haunt someone's dreams, even if they weren't in near proximity. You also didn't need to be in near proximity when doing a complete dive either, though it does require the victim to be directly under the diving spell, which requires close proximity to cast. Naminé gasps, realizing what this might mean. Ienzo continues that Xemnas took note of its usefulness and forced Zexion to teach him the spell. But around that time, Xemnas also discovered Naminé and was much more interested in using her, so diving was shelved. Naminé reconfirms that Xemnas knew the diving spell and says that they have to get to Sora right away. Lee, coming to the same conclusion as her, insists he tag along. She summons a portal and her and Lee hop over to Yensid's study, reporting that Sora, Riku, and Kairi are all in danger and they need to wake up immediately. She explains the situation, which prompts Yensid to reply that he senses that all three of them have been steadily approaching the deepest depths of Sora's heart and that there haven't been any major interruptions. Naminé is insistent that they at least have to warn them, and that's when King Mickey volunteers that he dive in to let them know. Yensid advises against it due to King Mickey being the strongest among them and that he's needed to protect them in case of any physical interruptions, but that regardless, even if he dived, he would have to start all the way from the beginning. Naminé then suggests that she go. Yensid also advises against it, not being able to speak on behalf of Naminé's abilities. That's when Lee offers to go with her, saying if there's a chance he could run into Roxas and Xion, then it's worth it, which prompts Yensid to reluctantly accept the offer and let them go. So Naminé casts a spell on her and Lee, connecting them to the network of Sora's dreams. They both find themselves landing in Sora's dive to the heart, both sporting new outfits to their surprise. But even more to their surprise, they find themselves both wielding keyblades. Lee and Naminé are in shock for a moment, but there's no time to waste, so they proceed as fast as possible. After many Disney shenanigans and Dream Eater fiascos, our characters have all made their way into the deepest depths of Sora's heart, arriving in a completely new world I'm calling Memories Contortion. My idea is that this is a location that acts like a reserve for some of the strongest memories in Sora's heart, meaning the world itself is one giant chaotic fusion of past worlds and experiences. Think End of the World from KH1 with sections sort of torn up and disjointed, but now with the maps physically merged on top of each other. Let's say you're in the Twilight Town section and literally halfway through the area pieces of Radiant Garden are intertwined with the middle of the town as it leads right into the castle from Radiant Garden. However, it would only be small sections of each world. I also imagine something like the Dark World from 0.2 where chunks of the landscape are ripped out and floating all over the place. Hopefully that all makes sense. The worlds I think should be specifically represented here is Radiant Garden, Twilight Town, Destiny Islands, Castle Oblivion, and Land of Departure, and each character will be played in different sections. When our characters first arrive, they all meet up in the same part, Radiant Garden. Since it's their first time being together since the start, they group hug, glad that each other are safe. They catch each other up to speed on what's been going on, namely the things said by Xigbar and Saïx regarding the balance of light and darkness, and Sora talking about the mysterious Keyblade wielder he's encountered. Riku assumes the unknown master is likely just another element from Master Ventus's memories, which is a satisfying enough explanation for now. Kairi spots 3 glowing orbs hovering off in the distance, prompting them to get a closer look. As they approach, the 3 orbs suddenly dash off in opposite directions, forcing Sora, Riku, and Kairi to split up and chase after each. The first orb takes Riku into the Radiant Garden Castle, where he explores the different floors following the orb. In the entrance hall, Riku spots Ansem, who appears to also be following the orb, to Riku's surprise. Once Riku makes it to the Grand Hall, spotting the glowing orb, Riku is suddenly hit with a headache and begins re-experiencing the day he was possessed by Ansem and was forced to fight Sora, nearly killing his best friend. Riku slowly looks around to make sure it's over, and the glowing orb hovers before him. As he walks towards it, the orb materializes into a hooded figure looking the opposite direction. Riku halts, drawing his Keyblade. The hooded figure takes off his hood, revealing it to be Roxas. Riku calls out Roxas's name in surprise, retracting his Keyblade. Roxas looks down at the ground in sorrow, asking if this was the place he was born. Riku is confused by the question before realizing what he's asking and confirming. Roxas asks Riku why he stopped him back then, referring to the ending of days. Riku sinks in guilt, responding that he had to do what he could to restore Sora and that it was the only way. Roxas snaps, shouting that he could have put a stop to things, that he could have ended Xemnas then and there, and that Xemnas took everything from him. Riku responds that they couldn't take that risk, and there was no guarantee that if Roxas died, Sora would ever be able to wake up again. Roxas interrupts, continuing that he never asked for any of this, and all he wanted was to be with Xion and Axel. Roxas asks, "Why me?" as he starts tearing. Riku takes a deep breath, assuring that Xemnas is gone now. Riku states that everything he did to Roxas was awful, and a simple apology doesn't cut it, but that he's here to correct his mistakes and set Xion and him free. Roxas is surprised, unsure of what to say. Suddenly, you hear the words, "You're pathetic," as Ansem walks up behind Roxas. Roxas quickly turns around before Ansem's guardian grabs Roxas, restraining him. Riku shouts Ansem's name, demanding he let him go. Roxas is sent away, but as Riku tries to jump after him, Ansem stops him and teleports them to that dark arena from the original where you have a battle against Ansem. In his defeat, the scene that happens during the original plays out mostly the same, where Riku spots Ansem's guardian reaching out to him, only for Riku to hold up his Keyblade and the guardian put his arm down in respect as it fades away, which is a nod to Terra's soul being the guardian. Riku is sent back to the Grand Hall, and this section ends with him leaving to go chase after Roxas. The next section is Kairi's section, who's following her orb into Destiny Islands. As she wanders around, she begins reliving a memory of when she had first arrived in Destiny Islands. Her escape pod crash landed onto the main shore, which was witnessed by a young Sora. He instantly reacts and runs over to the pod, staring in awe. The pod opens to expose a young Kairi, crying in fear. Sora asks who she is, and wiping her tears, she says her name is Kairi. Sora then asks where she came from, which Kairi has a hard time answering, saying she's from the castle. Sora, not knowing what that means, introduces himself, asking where her parents are. Kairi says she doesn't know, and how her grandma and grandpa were attacked by these scary monsters. Young Sora's imagination is intrigued by the idea, saying if there are any monsters, they can beat them up, showing her his wooden sword. Kairi feels a bit of comfort by the idea. Sora holds the sword in both hands, thinking for a second, and says that Kairi can have it, handing it to her. Kairi holds it for a moment, asking, "Isn't it yours?" To which Sora replies that he can just make another one and that she'll need it to fight the monsters. Kairi thanks Sora, hugging the sword as she smiles with a big grin. The memory ends there, with present Kairi tearing up. She grabs her Wayfinder from her pocket, clutching it in her hands, and remembers how Sora made her feel so safe back then. She snaps back into the mission as she spots the glowing orb out in the distance. The orb transforms into another hooded figure that begins running away. She chases after the person, who leads her to the Twilight Town Station Plaza. However, waiting for her there is Xemnas. Kairi draws her Keyblade. Xemnas speaks.
Kairi, I must say, the dutiful sacrifice of your dear grandfather brought you to this very instance. Risking your life to learn the art of the Keyblade, only for your journey to end at me once more. Such a cruel irony, wouldn't you agree?
Kairi shouts that he's just a nightmare and that she's not afraid of him. Xemnas laughs.
The conditions of my existence are no longer relevant. However, your reality is ever present. A lost princess who fancies herself a potential Keyblade master, but could never compare to the likes of Sora or Riku. Why bother?
Kairi exclaims that she doesn't have to be better than Sora and Riku to know that she can defeat her enemies and protect the ones she loves, and that the three of them will always be stronger together. Xemnas scoffs, continuing,
The darkness consumed your home twice over, and yet you opposed the darkness's demise, a decision which laid waste to poor Gnosis. Where do your loyalties lie, Kairi?
Kairi breathes in, delivering that Gnosis isn't dead. She knows he's still out there because she can feel him, and that's what love feels like. The darkness didn't take her world, Ansem took her world. Her grandpa wasn't fighting the light, he was fighting a selfish, power-hungry psychopath. Xemnas begins floating and drawing his powers, teleporting Kairi in an area above Twilight Town with floating buildings where they have their battle. So yeah, instead of Xemnas being fought by Sora in the world that never was and using buildings from the Dark City, he's fought by Kairi in Twilight Town. Kind of a dramatic change, but you'll see why in a bit. After Kairi defeats Xemnas, he stumbles off the floating buildings and falls into town. Kairi falls back to the station plaza, and as she catches her breath and looks around, she spots the glowing orb as it materializes into the hooded figure again. Kairi approaches them as they turn around and remove their hood, revealing it to be Xion. Kairi's obviously never seen her before, but remembers they're looking for a girl named Xion, so she asks if that's the case, to which Xion nods her head. Kairi gives a warm smile and tells Xion that it's nice to meet her, introducing herself. Xion gasps, surprised that it's Kairi, asking if she's Sora's girlfriend that she's heard about. Kairi gets flustered as Xion giggles at her embarrassment, but her smile soon fades, continuing that she's glad that Sora's back to normal now, but that she wishes she could have met him at least once before she disappeared. Xion then explains that she thought that by sacrificing herself she would cease to exist, but now she's stuck wandering this place forever. That's when Xion realizes that it shouldn't be possible that Kairi's here. Kairi explains that they dived into Sora's heart to bring back her and Roxas. Xion, surprised to learn that she's in Sora's heart, asks if someone else came with her. Kairi nods, saying that Sora and Riku are here looking for her as well. Xion is hesitant, inquiring that if she returns, wouldn't Sora be incomplete again? Kairi shakes her head, describing that Xion has her own heart, that when she was created, she accidentally held many of Sora's memories, but Naminé fixed that. Now all that's left is her. They just have to reawaken her heart and things will be as they should. Xion begins to tear up, confirming that means that she can see Roxas and Axel again. Kairi holds out her hand and smiles. As Xion streams tears of joy and reaches out for Kairi's hand, they're interrupted by Xemnas saying,
"Useless puppet,"
and Xion being binded out of nowhere. That's when we see Xemnas limping from behind them, casting the bind. Xion struggles to escape as Kairi jumps into action to stop him. Before she can reach him, Xemnas sends Xion away. As Kairi finishes Xemnas off and he fades away, she yells out Xion's name and chases after her. And now onto Sora's section. Sora ends up following his orb to Castle Oblivion. As Sora looks around the outside of the castle, he spots Aqua standing before Terranort. Confused as to who the woman is while recognizing Xehanort from the picture in Gnosis' study, snippets from the scenario from Birth by Sleep start to play out, with Terranort confronting Aqua, them fighting, and Terranort banishing her to the realm of darkness. In these snippets, Sora's able to make out that the woman is Aqua through their exchanges, and also that Xehanort has Terra's heart. As the sequence ends, the castle begins to shift and transform back into the land of departure. Sora's baffled by the transformation. Sora then spots the orb flying into the mountains, so he quickly follows it to the mountain path. As he makes it to the summit, something strange happens. He sees the orb materialize into Anti-Sora, who then grows Keyblade armor that makes it look like the armored Ventus Nightmare. You fight the armored Nightmare at the summit, and upon its defeat, the armor slowly cracks until it shatters, revealing someone who looks like Roxas, falling over. Sora, of course, confuses him to be Roxas and rushes to help him, calling out Roxas's name. As Sora holds him and Ventus awakens, he finally tries to stand on his own. Sora helps him up, and Ven asks if it's really him, stating Sora's name. Sora responds that he's glad he found him, calling him Roxas. Ven does the whole, "Roxas? I'm Master Ventus. You can call me Ven." Sora is surprised, realizing that's what Yen Sid meant by Roxas looking like Master Ventus. Sora nervously apologizes, but Ven suddenly yells out to watch out behind him. Sora turns around to see young Xehanort approaching the two. This phase of young Xehanort is right after escaping the Dark Realm, and he's still very passionate and fired up over his experiences there. Xehanort says, "This world, the land of departure. For many it's known as a beacon of light that protects the world from danger. But in reality, it's nothing but a kingdom built on blood. Tell him, Master Ventus. Tell him about how we spent our lives slaughtering the heartless." Ven exclaims how he doesn't know the first thing about him, then demands to know how he knows his name, summoning his Keyblade. Xehanort rebuttals, "You and I were the same once. Masters, blinded by raw patriotism and indoctrination, knowing nothing but the lies taught to us by our superiors. But the wool was lifted from my eyes, Ventus. I've seen the Dark Realm. I know the horrible things we've done." Ven asks if he thinks he doesn't know that after all these years. He says that his masters lied to everyone, and they paid the price for it, so why doesn't he just drop it already? Ven charges at Xehanort, shouting to leave Sora's heart alone. As Ven is about to strike, Xehanort casts Stop Za, freezing him in place, with the radius just barely missing Sora. A helpless Ven is frozen in time as Xehanort remarks that they really are the same. He casts him away, sending him flying in the direction of the Dark City off in the distance. Sora shouts, "Master Ventus!" demanding to know where the unknown master is taking him, to which Xehanort responds that he wishes Sora didn't have to see that, and that he should come find him at the world that never was. Xehanort mounts his Keyblade glider and dashes off in the same direction. Sora immediately slides after him using flow motion. Cut to a scene of Riku and Kairi meeting back up at the edge of the world that never was, having both followed the direction Roxas and Xion were sent to. The reason the world that never was is still the final world because it's the most crucial memory present in Sora's heart, playing a significant role in Sora's, Roxas's, and Xion's lives, and to some extent Xehanort's as well. Riku and Kairi both ask where Sora is. Riku insists that he'll catch up and there's no time because they have to get to Roxas and Xion, so they both charge into the Dark City. Now, the world that never was will actually start with a cutscene of Sora, as he's already ahead of the other two. However, you won't play as Sora much in the final world, mostly to avoid making it needlessly repetitive. The scene starts with him encountering Xigbar, like he does originally. Only Xigbar banters about how they've been through a lot to get Sora to this point, adding that Xehanort's plan has been very makeshift, holding Riku and Kairi back to ensure Xehanort can get to him, but that everything worked out beautifully. That's when Syx also shows up, telling Sora that it's his turn to confront reality and let the darkness within him roam free. Sora's completely confused as both Xigbar and Syx move to bind Sora. With some difficulty, Sora is apprehended and made unconscious. As Sora slowly starts to fade out of consciousness, he can see young Xehanort stand before him, blacking out shortly after. As Riku and Kairi arrive in the Dark City and look around, Kairi notices Riku is obviously bothered by something. She asks him what's wrong, and Riku can't even look her in the eyes. She repeats her question. Riku tells Kairi that he never had a chance to apologize to her for everything he did during the events of KH1. Kairi instantly tries to dismiss it as unimportant, but Riku continues that he was so obsessed with the idea of leaving their world that when Ansem first approached him and explained to him that the darkness would help him leave, he was willing to abandon everything. And then when he found out Kairi's heart was within Sora, he let Ansem manipulate him even further just so he could save her, even if it meant making Sora his enemy. He stands there lamenting about how stupid and blind he was. Kairi grabs his hands, earnestly telling Riku that she forgives him, and that if Ansem had approached her that night, she can't say she wouldn't have acted similarly given her own obsession with returning to her home world. Riku knows that actions speak louder than words, and part of the reason this mission is so important to him is that he needs to clear his conscience. Kairi promises Riku that they'll finish this. That's when the city around them starts shifting as the two are forcefully separated. Why? Plot reasons, of course. Come on. Kairi and Riku will go off on their own paths throughout the world that never was, like originally. They should both make their way through parts of the city, then to the castle. Of course, originally you just run through big, empty maps with a couple of platforming maneuvers and minigames, fighting off mobs, but there's a good opportunity here to spice some things up. I think the platforming could be improved by letting you climb up on rooftops and sneaking down interesting alleyways. You start as Kairi in the first section going through her part of the city. I have a good idea for a boss that should appear for her in order to break up the monotony of just fighting mobs. The Data Dark Side from Coded. Since that game got scrapped, this awesome design should be recycled and planted here. And also this Rainbow Dark Side Nightmare thing should have a different moveset than the same old boring Dark Side boss fight we've seen a million times. Please, something new. Once the Dark Side is defeated and Kairi makes her way to the next room, approaching the castle, it cuts to Riku's section where he goes through something similar, but I think there's a good opportunity to have a recurring appearance from the anti-black coat Nightmare. What is this nightmare exactly? I mean, you can think of it as a manifestation of Riku's darkness, but I honestly just wanted Riku to have a cool fight here. It can start appearing amongst the mob fights and you sort of chase it around the city. Similar to how something like Sabor from Deep Jungle in KH1 kind of popped up all over the place. This occurs until you end up fighting it formally near the end of this section. And the anti-black coat should be a much better boss battle than it was originally. Good God, this fight fucking sucked. Once Riku makes it to the next room, we see a cutscene of both Kairi and Riku meeting up at the brink of despair, staring at the castle across the way with no path going forward, like originally. They consider their options to get across before Riku spots someone at the edge of the castle. As you get a closer look, it's Ven with a couple of Dream Eaters around him. Riku does the expected, "Is that Roxas?" I'm gonna milk that line until it's not ironically funny anymore, because they never did it in KH3. Sorry. Ven presses a button which opens up a path to the castle, and then he fades out, disappearing, leaving the Dream Eaters by themselves. This was just a spirit of Ven helping them out. Try not to think too hard about it. Deus Ex Machina shit. The two get going, and now they're at the castle. As they arrive in Nothing's Call, they see two hooded figures staring at them from afar. The figures both turn around and activate flow motion, sliding up the castle in opposite directions. Riku tells Kairi they have to split up again and chase after them. As Riku fights his way up, he eventually makes his way to the Verge of Chaos room. We see a scene where Riku is blindsided by some sniper nobodies, and as he's struggling to fight them, Naminé comes to his rescue. Riku's absolutely stunned at the sight of her and her Keyblade, complimenting how great she looks, and she assures him she's not a Dream Eater and that there's an emergency. She explains the situation, how Xehanort could possibly dive into Sora's heart, and that they need all the help they can get. Riku explains that Roxas and Xion must be in the castle somewhere, that Kairi is in another part of the castle, and that Sora is nowhere to be found. That's when Xigbar shows himself, commending Naminé for her clever deduction of Xehanort's plan, outright confirming it. As they both slowly realize he's not a nightmare, Breig also boasts how Sora's in Xehanort's hands, and how it's his job to keep them out of the way. Commence the fight with Breig, the last battle of Riku's story, where Naminé is a party member. Riku and Naminé force Breig to the point where he has to wake himself up to avoid dying, and that's that. Riku and Naminé, knowing they now also have to save Sora, hurry onwards. Kairi's section flows similarly. She also makes her way up towards another arena-type area. I don't know, there's only so much variety. As she fights off berserker nobodies, she's caught by surprise when she sees Lee fighting his way through. She draws her Keyblade, believing he's a nightmare, but he explains himself and how he came with Naminé, warning her of Xehanort as well. As Kairi is still skeptical, Saix calls out Lee's name as they see him approach. Lee responds saying Isa's name, demanding to know what he's doing here. Kairi tells Lee that he's a nightmare, but Lee denies it, saying he can tell it's the real him, that he can feel it in his heart. Isa responds, "So that's what that feeling is," implying he feels the same thing. Lee pleads that after all the manipulation, all the lies, and having their hearts split, how can Isa still fight for Xehanort? Isa corrects that his heart was never actually fragmented, and that before Xehanort split his heart, both him and Breig were entrusted with keeping tabs on and guiding Ansem and Xemnas, that the two worked from the shadows to ensure Xehanort's plans came to fruition. Lee's heart sinks knowing he was being manipulated by his friend the whole time. Isa continues that Lee's heart was weak from the start, and it's no wonder Xehanort cast him out. That's when Lee turns to rage, drawing his Keyblade to Isa's disbelief, already proving that Lee's heart definitely isn't weak. Lee asserts that their plan failed and demands to know where Roxas and Xion are, as Isa belittles their friendship, saying it was never real, pissing off Lee even more. Isa admits the organization was a failure, but that their new plan has only just begun. And then, fight time. Kairi and Lee take on Isa, and upon defeat, Isa is forced to wake up as well. After all that, we cut to a scene of Sora waking up in Where Nothings Gather, binded to one of the thrones similar to the original. Standing in the center before him is young Xehanort. Sora writhers around to try and escape as Xehanort is pacing. He begins venting about how no one believes him. After everything they've been through, all the training, every never-ending deployment, always having each other's backs, trusting each other with their lives, they looked him dead in the eyes and think he's gone mad, that what he's seen isn't real. Xehanort states that he knows what he's seen, that he lived it for what seemed like an eternity. He continues that the darkness isn't their enemy and that they aren't the heroes. And how could not a single soul have known this? Why have they been lied to? Sora blurts out demanding to know who he is and what he's done with Master Ventus. Xehanort sighs, revealing that he is binding and holding captive not just Ventus, but Roxas and Xion as well. Young Xehanort finally introduces himself as Master Xehanort, a name that makes Sora's eyes widen in shock. Xehanort continues that it was fate that they met that day in Traverse Town, that Sora's Kingdom Key is special and can show everyone the truth, that it can prove that what he's seen isn't a lie. He explains that the Kingdom Key is a legendary weapon that can bridge the darkness back into the world, and that together they can expose the lies once and for all. Xehanort then pleads that Sora assist him in this quest. Sora desperately wants to believe that this Xehanort is only a dream, and that he must be some sort of past memory of Xehanort. He asserts that he has to save his friends and demands Xehanort release the 3 sleeping hearts. Xehanort is visibly hurt that Sora would refuse such an offer after everything he said. He insists that Sora see that he has the power to fix everything and that Xehanort only wants to help him. Sora says that after everything Xehanort has done, there's no chance Sora can trust him. As he squirms to try and free himself, Xehanort realizes he has no choice but to take the Kingdom Key by force. Sora manages to break free of his binds as Xehanort teleports them to the Sanctum of Time battlefield, where the final battle takes place between Sora and young Xehanort. As young Xehanort is defeated, they're teleported back to Where Nothings Gather, and we see young Xehanort slowly fading away. Suddenly, another voice begins speaking, and Sora looks up to see the real Xehanort, Terranort, sitting atop the highest throne with Ven, Roxas, and Xion's binded bodies hovering around him. Xehanort reminisces how after he returned from the Dark Realm, he was never the same, unable to make sense of the life he lived as he struggled to find his purpose. For his own safety, he began pretending like he gave up those thoughts and started believing in the light again, to his fellow masters' relief. But once you've seen the truth and feel those feelings, it never goes away, and his curiosity only grew stronger from then onwards. Sora's supremely confused, asking if he's also Xehanort? Xehanort confirms, but states that unlike his younger self he saw before him, Terranort's not a dream, explaining how he dived into Sora's heart and that young Xehanort was the memory of himself when he was younger that spilled into Sora's dream. Master Xehanort formally introduces himself, stating how he's wanted to meet Sora face to face for quite some time. Sora can only stare, frozen in shock. Xehanort begins by saying he senses that Sora still fears the darkness due to what Ansem and the Heartless did to his home. Xehanort once shared a similar sentiment, but that they only fear what they do not understand. He continues that the Land of Departure and the Cult of Light manufactured this fear for centuries under the guise of protecting people from the vicious Heartless. But the only thing to fear was this obsession with war and conquest that has brought the darkness to near extinction. He poses the question: how could the darkness be wrong for wanting only to survive? Would the light not do the same? Sora asks Xehanort why he extracted Kairi's heart and took control of Riku, why he experimented on all the members of the organization and used Roxas and Xion as pawns. And remembering his earlier discovery, he also asks why he took control of Terra's heart and banished Aqua to the realm of darkness. Xehanort glares off in the distance, admitting that the Keyblade Masters opposed balance at all costs, and Xehanort had no choice but to fight them. He then explains that he was old and feeble, and the only way to ensure the continuation of his will was to possess the body of another. Once his plans were foiled at the Keyblade graveyard, he truly believed his goal was stomped for good, and he had nothing left to live for, but believed that Gnosis's research in the experiments of the heart offered him one last chance to set things right. He was overtaken by desperation and could not foresee the many misfortunes that would occur due to him splitting his heart. He ultimately could not predict the actions of Ansem and Xemnas, but regardless, he bears full responsibility and understands why Sora might hate him because of it. Sora asks to know what his plan really is. Xehanort explains what we already know, the imbalance of light and dark, the weakened Kingdom Hearts driving the worlds apart, and how the Kingdom Keys are the pieces needed to restore such balance. Xehanort admits that the actions taken by his fragments have not been the nicest, but they were necessary sacrifices to set things right. Sora goes off about how hearts aren't just bottles on a shelf, and that the lives of his friends were ruined at the helm of Xehanort's actions, and that despite Xehanort trying to do the right thing, he's still here, playing with Roxas, Xion, and Ventus's lives just to get to Sora. Sora asks when the fighting and tricks are supposed to end. Xehanort sits up in his chair, explaining that he has done what he has done in this dream because there is very little time left. He explains that the Cult of Light was not completely destroyed with the Land of Departure, and thus they will soon return to take back their place, inevitably targeting the Kingdom Keys. Xehanort needed to take drastic measures to ensure he could meet with Sora today, and that despite previous notions, the fact that the Kingdom Keys both chose wielders who don't oppose each other, but rather work together changes everything he thought he knew. Xehanort gives the offer to join him now and bring the forces of light and dark back together in proper harmony. Sora is obviously hesitant, but is also unsure if he can even get past his distrust in the darkness. Xehanort explains what he said to Terra all those years ago, that the darkness lives within all of them and can be a force for good all the same. As Sora sits in anxious consideration, Xehanort begins to lose patience with the matter, suggesting Sora see for himself. He stands upon his throne and casts a dark spell, one that immediately connects with Sora and brings his darkness to the forefront, quickly turning Sora into Anti-Sora. Sora reacts in pain, falling to his knees as he's unable to contain the power. Xehanort stares intensely, shouting that the only way he can control it is to stop fearing the darkness and welcome the power into his heart. Sora is shouting in pain, unable to control it, as Xehanort is startled by something from above. Xehanort summons his Keyblade and clashes with Riku, who glares into Xehanort's eyes intensely. Kairi sneaks up behind Sora and tries to help him up, but Anti-Sora swats her hand away, as Sora yells to stay away. Kairi shouts that he can't let his darkness control him, as Anti-Sora is struggling in a pool of darkness. Cut to Riku, who is on a lower throne. He notices Roxas, Xion, and Ven binded by Xehanort, demanding he lets them go. Xehanort recognizes Riku as the boy who conquered both light and dark, asserting that he's fighting for the wrong side. Xehanort summons his guardian, sending it after Riku. Kairi realizes Sora has lost control and begins to conjure a light spell to try and revert him. Xehanort sees this and tells her not to get ahead of herself, as he casts Stopza, halting the entire area. Everyone except Xehanort is frozen in place. He looks down to Sora, halted mid-struggle with the darkness, and realizes the plan has veered out of hand and he must take drastic measures. Xehanort knows what he must do and conjures the spell to release Sora's heart. However, he's startled from above once again as he sees Naminé, who is casting the spell Ultima, using both her spellbook and her new Keyblade. The spell is powerful enough to shatter Stopza, releasing everyone. Suddenly, Xehanort is forced to block 2 chakrams out of nowhere, as Lee lands on a throne adjacent to him. He catches both chakrams and turns them into his Keyblade to Xehanort's disbelief. Riku calls him out as Axel, who corrects him. Xehanort admits he is impressed by him wielding a Keyblade, as Lee banters how Xehanort always said his heart was wavering, but in actuality, Lee knew that manipulating a bunch of kids was bad news. Xehanort snaps and summons a huge wave of darkness that blasts Lee and Riku back. Everyone is knocked down to the ground as Xehanort and his guardian unleash an unholy amount of darkness and summons dark chains that move to bind everyone. Naminé struggles to gain control of her hand as she snaps the binds away. As they recover, Riku demands that Naminé wake Lee and herself up and let him and Kairi end things. Kairi insists that they all leave as it's too dangerous, but Riku yells that they can't leave Roxas, Xion, and Ven, who are still under Xehanort's control. Riku repeats to wake themselves as Naminé makes him promise to come back safe, waking up Lee and herself shortly thereafter. Riku instructs Kairi to protect Sora at all costs as he can't wake up until they've finished things. Xehanort yells in frustration as he sends his guardian towards Riku and Kairi. Kairi flings her Keyblade to stop it as Riku lunges past them directly towards Xehanort. Riku conjures a particularly powerful waking spell with his Keyblade as he uses his other hand to cast a Dark Reflega, blocking Xehanort's oncoming attacks. Riku arduously pushes against the onslaught to try and move closer as he yells at Kairi to wake herself up when he gets close enough. Kairi yells she can't leave him and Sora as he assures her he isn't waking up without ending things. As she manages to slash the Guardian away, Riku edges close enough and Kairi reluctantly wakes up, casting a Reflega around Sora as she leaves. Riku pushes harder against the blast as Xehanort struggles immensely to hold him back, perplexed at the boy's strength. The waking spell cast out of Riku's Keyblade grows larger and brighter as he's edging even closer. Riku uses every last bit of strength to maneuver close enough. A tear streams out of Riku's eye as he is able to release his spell onto Roxas, Xion, Ventus, and Xehanort. Large, epic Dragon Ball Z level explosion of energy happens, consuming Sora last as the screen fades to white. You may have noticed one key omission from everything. What about the true Organization 13? Where were they? I've already mentioned that I've scrapped this plot point, but I want to discuss what that will entail moving forward. In short, we will not be fighting another Organization 13 come KH3. I felt that the trope of the organization was more fitting to KH2 in that its re-inclusion in Dream Drop Distance onwards was repetitive and formulaic. Multiple Xehanorts and the weird point about 7 of Light, 13 of Darkness was just awkward and not even suggested by games prior. I don't like it. The formula of the org already overstayed its welcome and the characters have had enough, so it's out. That being said, there will still be multiple high-level opponents nearing the finale of KH3, including Breig, Isa, and Xehanort, but with 0.2 leading into KH3, I will introduce who these new big bads will be to fill the void. I'm excited for it, and I think it will definitely freshen up the KH3 experience. We catch Kairi waking up from the dream, seeing Naminé, Lee, Yensid, Mickey, Donald, and Goofy staring at her, glad she's awake. Kairi jolts all the way up and moves over to Sora and Riku, both still asleep. They watch as the dive spell fades away, leaving just their 2 unconscious bodies. The room goes silent for a moment too long as the fear that they didn't make it waves over everyone. Tears begin to shed all around until suddenly, Sora's eyes open, witnessing 3 hearts emerge from within him. The hearts float up higher and higher before phasing through the ceiling, drifting into the sky and stars where they seek to reconnect with their original bodies. Sora is awake and confused as Kairi wraps her arms around him. Yensid continues staring at the ceiling, relieved that the mission was successful. Naminé kneels before Riku, placing one hand on his chest and one hand on her own. She closes her eyes and realizes that she can still feel him. That's when Riku slowly awakens as well. Naminé is holding back tears as Riku asks if they actually did it. She nods as the gang moves to hug Riku, who remains in shock. Cut to the trio finishing explaining everything that went down. Yensid realizes that it's exactly as they feared, and it is paramount they assemble all the Keyblade wielders. They now know Aqua was banished to the realm of darkness, that Terra is under the possession of Xehanort, and that Roxas's body remains in the digital Twilight Town. Xion's body is possibly also somewhere in Twilight Town, meanwhile Ven's body is unknown. Mickey remembers that Aqua was the last person to see Ven, meaning in order to locate him, they will likely have to retrieve Aqua from the realm of darkness. Yensid then discusses the results of their exam. He commends everyone for their astounding performance, adapting to a situation even more dangerous than anticipated, greatly improving their proficiency with the Keyblade and its many intricacies, and successfully completing the mission. Yensid gives special notice to Kairi, who improved most of all, exceeding expectations. He remarks on their resounding will to protect each other and those in need, and how such a will for friendship and to do what's right marks the traits of a true Keyblade master. Yensid has no doubt in his mind that together, the trio will be one of their greatest assets in the oncoming conflict and any conflicts that lie beyond. However, it is of Yensid's judgment that only one of them exceeded all expectations, displaying the skill and willpower needed to be dubbed master, continuing that Riku, not only proved his mastery in both the powers of light and dark, in the end he made the sacrificing play, risking his own life to ensure he saved those he once wronged, overcoming his ultimate burden. Yen-Sid laments how he had his doubts about the darkness and if it's a force they could trust in the fight against Xehanort, but time and time again Riku proved those doubts to be unfounded. Thus Yen-Sid names Riku their new Keyblade Master. As everyone celebrates Riku's mark of mastery, Yen-Sid assures Sora and Kairi that they aren't far behind, and that he's confident they will prove themselves worthy in the upcoming conflict. That's when Lee steps up and asks for everyone's permission that he join in the fight. He says that he doesn't expect their forgiveness for standing against them a couple of times, but if the road ahead means he can save his friends and get revenge, then he wants in. Kairi replies that they know he was being manipulated by Xemnas and welcomes him to the team, to Lee's surprise. Naminé steps up behind Lee, saying she wants in as well, bragging how they even had Keyblades in the dream world, but their current weapons will have to do. Halfway in the middle of her sentence, Lee holds out his hand and is able to summon his new Keyblade in real life. Everyone is flabbergasted as Naminé quickly scrambles to summon hers as well. After a moment, Yen-Sid concludes that there is no telling when Xehanort will make his next move, so Mickey and him will quickly work to devise a strategy moving forward. In the meantime, Yen-Sid grants everyone time to rest because they deserve it for a job well done, but recommends they take the time to prepare for what's coming and be ready at a moment's notice. He also recommends that Naminé and Lee work to hone their skills with the Keyblade, suggesting paying a visit to Merlin. As everyone begins to head out the door, before he forgets, Yen-Sid makes one final declaration, that the time is now to embrace the darkness within their hearts. Sora looks down, before turning and leaving with the rest of the gang. Everyone steps outside the tower to realize that Sora is dragging his feet. Sora's distraught, stuck thinking about Xehanort. He speaks up, saying that in his dream, he could feel Xehanort's emotions throughout his life and how his strongest emotion was the betrayal he felt. No one believed him, and because of it, he felt completely alone. He continues that Xehanort believes with every ounce of his heart that he is right, that the darkness is in pain and needs to be saved. Lee chimes in, saying that the light has spent countless years destroying the darkness in all corners of the universe, and if the forces of light and darkness are meant to be a balance, it only makes sense that they try and reclaim what was lost, even if it means war. Riku states that even if that's the case, if the darkness attacks their worlds, what are they supposed to do? They have a duty to protect innocent people. The gang goes silent before Riku says that maybe they could stop this before it even begins, and that if someone like Ansem could earn the trust of the Heartless, perhaps they could as well. Sora stares off into the distance, saying Xehanort's name. We catch a glimpse of Terranort standing in the Keyblade graveyard. The scene ends there. One final scene plays at the end. We see a first-person perspective of someone waking up in the pod in Twilight Town. They look at their hands, seeing that it's Roxas. The pod opens from the outside, and standing before him is Isa. The end. This time around, I'm not planning on doing any gameplay changes. It's not that I don't want to do gameplay changes. Obviously, it's Dream Drop Distance. It needs gameplay changes, but I just don't want to edit it. I don't want to have to play through Dream Drop Distance on PC, get all the stuff I need in the game to record footage for changes. It's just a lot of work. Other than that, that's everything for the rewrite. It's been a long wait. I apologize. Life just happened. In terms of when the next part's gonna come out, I got no clue. Next one's gonna be a little difficult. It's 0.2. I gotta figure out how I'm gonna do like data greetings, if that's even gonna be a thing this time around. But I will be working on it. Look forward to it eventually. I'll give updates whenever necessary. And yeah, thank you guys once again. It's been a crazy journey.